Welcome to Roy's Book Reviews. Today I want to discuss with you a classic that perhaps invented the genre of revenge books. If that's a genre, and I suppose that it must be considered to be so. This book has been on my bucket list for quite a few years. I now get to check it off the list. I was motivated to finally read it after watching the first season of the Netflix series Lupin. My library did not have the original Arsène Lupin source book on hand, which I wanted to read after seeing the first season of Lupin that ended on quite the cliffhanger note. So instead I borrowed a book that it reminded me of, The Count of Monte Cristo. It's been a minute since I last read a book written 100 plus years ago, deploying a flowery type of language that nobody writes or speaks in anymore. Back in my school days, I used to read such books on a regular basis, having been an English major at NYU, and so I was used to it back then. But over the past couple decades, I have primarily read books with a more contemporary feel. Even if the setting of some of the books I've read take place quite a ways back, they were not written during the time period that events take place, and so the prose was more accessible than a book published in 1844. After watching the Netflix series Bridgerton and Lupin back-to-back, I was ready to immerse myself in the distant past, and in a story that we all know something about, even if we've never read or even previously seen a screen adaptation, which was the case with me. I've heard about this book. I knew in general what it was about, but I had never actually seen a series or a movie based on it. So I knew the premise, but I didn't know the nitty-gritty. There are approximately 1,000 characters names to keep track of in the Count of Monte Cristo, which is perhaps a slight exaggeration, though only about 500 characters, since everybody seems to go by at least two different names from the early chapters of the book to the later ones. This includes the title character, the Count of Monte Cristo, who starts out as Edmond Dantes before going through hell and coming out on the other side with a much fancier title and lifestyle. I can't say that I love the Count of Monte Cristo. Maybe I was unfairly comparing it to more modern novels, not just the language in which people speak that has gotten a lot more relaxed over the years, but the storytelling arc and pacing and character motivations and plausibility of the narrative. It was a bit too over the top for my liking, like a soap opera on steroids set in the days of yesteryear. The old classic I read well after my days of assigned readings, the last one I would say was The Picture of Dorian Gray. As with the Count of Monte Cristo, I knew going in from its lofty reputation what Dorian's story was about in general, even if I didn't know the specifics of what was going to happen. Dorian Gray is a much shorter book than Monte Cristo. In the end, I'm glad that I read both of these classics. I'm happy to have checked them off of my book bucket list. I am not one of those people who of late have been broadly disparaging books that are part of the literary canon and are referred to as classics. There are plenty of books falling into this category that I greatly enjoyed. And yes, there are also some that I slogged through. Depending on which section I was up to in the Count of Monte Cristo, sometimes I was slogging and other times I was racing through to see what would happen next. It's certainly not an uneventful book. Should I take on that other Alexandre Dumas classic, The Three Musketeers? Perhaps someday. We shall see. Another story that I know plenty about and yet not nearly enough, though I do recall having seen adaptations of the Three Musketeers, so I would go into that one knowing a little bit more than I did with the Count of Monte Cristo. I'll close out this review with the final words of the Count of Monte Cristo because they are lovely and profound and worth repeating. Until the day when God will deign to reveal the future to man, all human wisdom is contained in these two words: wait and hope. I waited quite some time before finally reading the Count of Monte Cristo. I hoped I would enjoy it. Now I'm hoping that the next book I read will knock my socks off, and I don't intend to wait too long to find out. That about covers everything I have to say about the Count of Monte Cristo. It's a rather sizable book, so it took me a lot longer to get through reading it than it took for me to discuss it here. But I would say that if you are somebody who, wants to have certain books that are just like touchstone type books, the ones that everybody, knows the basic premise of and uses them, as a metaphor when discussing more contemporary events, then you'll want to add the Count of Monte Cristo to your list, so that when you talk about somebody who went through hell and made it through and then decided that they wanted to exact revenge on everyone who wronged them, you will have the origin story in your list of books that have already been read, rather than languishing in your to-be-read pile. Okay, that's pretty much all I have to say. Until the next time, this is Roy, wishing you happy reading.